This message comes from NPR sponsor Discover. Discover will automatically double all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This week, we're connecting the dots between nude parades, gold medals, and femininity cards. I know. How are all these things connected? Well, we're going to find out with ESPN features writer Katie Barnes and Rose Eveleth, host of NPR's Tested, a show all about sex testing in women's sports. Katie, Rose, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Thank you.
Excited to be here.
It's so great to have you both here. Okay, so now the Olympics are about to kick off. What stories are you most excited to see play out this year?
Unrolls a scroll that's like 100 feet long.
Yeah, right. I always unroll my scroll of names. I think at the top, Gretchen Walsh, not only did she make the team, she broke the world record in the 100 fly at trials.
I'm a track guy, so I am just super excited to see, is Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone going to break the world record again? I'm sure she's trying very hard, but she looked so casual doing it. Like, it just was unreal.
All right, I love this enthusiasm, and I am ready to post up on my couch and see these athletes just pop off and do their thing. But before we get to the actual competition, we got to talk about a major milestone happening this year. Sure, there's the new breakdancing competition or kayak cross, which is like extreme kayaking. Honestly, slay. But what I'm talking about is that at the Paris Olympics, for the first time in history, 50% of athletes will compete on men's teams and 50% will compete on women's. And that's great. But is this a total feminism win? Gender equality achieved, yes or no?
I mean, I think the answer is kinda. The reality is, yes, there are more athletes competing in women's sports than ever before. And that is always something to celebrate. And, not but we're also seeing a rise in policing as it comes to women's sports in terms of who is eligible to compete in that category. And that has come with a rise of restrictive policy. Yes, there are a lot of athletes who are competing at the Olympics for the first time. And also, there are many who are not eligible to compete in the ways that they might have hoped to.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yes, and.
As you both have said, I mean, it's kind of like a hard thing to tease out because on the one hand, it is really cool that there is this gender parity for the first time at the Olympics, but it also hides the fact that there are other ways that some athletes are kept out of competing at the Olympic level. And think of the decathlon, for example. That's a combo of 10 track and field events, which, as of this Olympics, only men can compete in, despite extreme interest from women decathlon athletes. Rose, I know you've got thoughts on why it's taken so long, and it's still not quite equal.
Let's take it back to 1928,
Throwing it back.
I can't speak for what World Athletics is thinking in terms of why they do or don't allow certain events. But from the very beginning of particularly track and field at the Olympics, there has always been this idea that women need to be protected in some way from themselves, that women can't participate in particularly grueling sports. And 1928 is the first year women are allowed to compete in the Olympics on the track. And the 800 is the longest race they're allowed to run. The women run the 800. At the end of the race, many of them look tired. The men who were there, and also many men who were not there writing for newspapers, were like, this is an abomination. We cannot have this. They actually tried to then ban all track and field for women after that, but they only banned the 800. And the 800 was not allowed again for the women until 1960, actually.
Oh my gosh.
So there's been this sort of, I think, very deep-seated and long-running idea that some events are too hard for women.
Dovetailing with what Rose said, this idea about protecting women from exertion is a core part of the fight for women to participate and compete in sports since the dawn of sports, and also transcends track and field, right? Like it was Tokyo was the first time that they had the 1500 in swimming for women.
Rose, I know you've thought a lot about how the women's category has been fraught since the founding of the Olympics. The father of the modern Olympics banned women from competing. And as soon as they were allowed, there were problems from the beginning, as you mentioned, because women athletes weren't acting like women, perhaps quote unquote, should act. What are some of the ways the Olympics have tried to make sure the women athletes were quote unquote woman enough in the past?
Yeah, as you say, right, as soon as women start competing, the folks in charge are like, oh, some athletes must not really be women. Something is wrong with them. And they start saying that they're going to pull aside suspicious women for exams. And then in 1966, things change, and they decide that, in fact, it's not good enough to just do this on this case-by-case basis. They need to test everybody. So for 2 years, there's a policy called the nude parades, or at the time, also some athletes called them the peek and poke tests.
Oh, my gosh.
Which was literally you'd be brought into a room and asked to disrobe, get naked in front of a doctor, and they would look at your body and say, yep, you are a woman or not. And they would give you a certificate of femininity that you'd have to carry around with you to every event to prove that, like, you'd been checked. Obviously, incredibly invasive, very horrible, and very unpopular. They switched to a chromosome test. So between 1968 and 1999, so that's over 30 years, every single woman who went to the Olympics had to go through sex testing and get a little card. It says, like, I'm a woman, and you had to bring it with you if you wanted to compete. After 1999, they actually abandoned all of this. There was this really concerted effort by doctors and scientists who kind of were like, this is A, unreliable, B, invasive, and it won't do what you say you are trying to do, which is ostensibly catch masquerading males, is the way they like to talk about it, which is that this idea that, like, men are going to dress up as women and compete in women's sports, which has never happened, not a one time. And even if that were a thing that you might be worried about, a chromosome test is not actually going to necessarily catch those people because men can have XX chromosomes. So all of this was sort of nonsense, and they got rid of it in 1999. And then, of course, in 2009, Caster Semenya runs at the World Championships in Berlin, and this sort of conversation starts up all over again. And now we're sort of living in this new era of this sort of eligibility policies, as they're called, that kind of come through this timeline.
Huh. I think it's also important to note that people who compete in men's categories have never had to undergo this type of testing, to my knowledge.
That's such a great point, Brittany.
Now, fast forward to today. We've seen the International Olympic Committee put out some more inclusive guidelines that won't force women to literally pull down their pants. But these guidelines are just suggestions. The governing sports bodies, like World Athletics, which governs track and field, they decide who gets to compete in the Olympics. They don't have to adhere to these guidelines. Basically, even if the Olympics say they're more inclusive, what matters are these governing bodies. So have they updated their rules?
Well, with this new policy framework announced in 2021, the IOC said, international federations, you make up your own policies that are appropriate for your sport because perhaps each sport may have different concerns, which is a fair perspective to have. And they laid out this framework, asked the federations to consider it. And they promptly did not, I think is the best way of putting it. Nothing has happened. And a big part of that is, well, what is the IOC going to do? Kick track out of the Olympics?
Right.
Remove swimming from what would the consequences be?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that's important to note is that, as far as I know, and everyone I've talked to, women who are impacted by these policies are Black and brown women from the global South. And there's this question of, do you look like a woman? And then layered on top of that, there is the sort of racial element of, what does a woman look like? A woman looks like a nice white woman. Yeah. And because the current policy isn't a blanket sex test, which is, I'm not saying we should have that, it is only based on, does someone maybe rise to the level of potentially thinking they might fall under this umbrella of a DSD athlete, an athlete with a difference of sex development, you are only getting certain athletes challenged. In the people I've been looking at are athletes with sex variation. So not trans athletes, but athletes who were, assigned female at birth, always lived and raised as girls. They had no idea there was anything different about them until they got tested. And all of a sudden, you have this person who is told, oh, you're actually kind of not a woman. And that's just I think, an incredibly surreal thing to be told by someone who you don't know at all, right? Some person who's, taken a swab of your cheek and done a blood test and has told you this thing. And also, I think it invites a certain kind of speculation about a person. You know, all the women that I've talked to for this story have told me stories about how when they go home to their home countries, or when they, you know, are talking to people, people will ask them, like, are you actually a man? There's a lot of shame that's been sort of dropped onto them. They're told by sporting bodies that their bodies are actually sort of too good. They have an unfair advantage over other women, and so they have to take medical steps to lower their testosterone in order to compete. And so that's either medication or surgery, and that takes a big toll on people. You know, I'm so excited for the Olympics. I'm so excited to see these people. And also, you know, I can't watch track without thinking about Christine Boma, who, you know, won silver in Tokyo in the 200 and won't be there, right? Or, you know, Beatrice Masalingi, who was in that final in the 200 in Tokyo and won't be there. You know, all these women who won't be there.
If there are these restrictions, I wonder, like, what the personal implications of that can be for young athletes and children.
Well, it opens up the question of, are you girl enough? Are you woman enough? Right? If you set a boundary, that boundary has to be policed. If you're operating in a state where it's one of the 24 states in the United States that has passed restrictive legislation as it pertains to who's eligible for girls' sports at all levels in schools, then if you're in a school sport, there may be additional paperwork, or there are consequences if you knowingly enroll your child in a sport that they legally may not be allowed to participate in. When we talk about scrutiny, it raises that threshold of scrutiny for all girls in all sports in a way that I don't know that we have fully grappled with.
My gosh, I mean, the Olympics themselves, they seem to be very proud to have the same number of people competing in women's athletics this year as there are in men's. But as you both have pointed out, that doesn't necessarily mean equality. Katie, Rose, I have learned so much here. Thank you both so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
And as a thank you to you, I'd like to teach you both something by playing a game. Can you stick around for a tiny bit longer?
Yeah.
Games are fun. This is what I'm telling myself.
Wow, that was very convincing, Katie.
It is okay if you don't win every silly game.
Games are fun. Games are fun, exactly. We'll be right back with a little game I like to call, But Did You Know? Stick around.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Dignity Memorial. In life, you plan for many important things, like weddings, retirement, and your children's education. A celebration of life is really no different. Planning and paying for your celebration of life in advance protects your loved ones and gives you the peace of mind you deserve. It's truly one of the best gifts you can give your family. Dignity Memorial will help you take care of every detail with professionalism and compassion. For additional information, visit dignitymemorial.com.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Disney, presenting Young Woman and the Sea. This incredible true story from producer Jerry Bruckheimer stars Daisy Ridley as Trudy Ederle, who risked everything when she decided to swim the English Channel. The movie is streaming Friday on Disney+.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Discover. It's good to share helpful knowledge, so here's a tip that could be doubly helpful. Discover will automatically double all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means you could turn $150 cash back to $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This message comes from Progressive Insurance, where drivers who switch could save hundreds on car insurance. Get your quote at progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
All right. We're going to play a little game I like to call, But Did You Know? Here's how it works. I'm going to ask you trivia related to a single topic. Don't worry, it's all multiple choice, so the correct answer is in there somewhere. The first one to blurt out the right answer gets a point. Person with the most points wins, and their prize is bragging rights. Katie, depending on how you look at it, there's not that much at stake. This isn't Wheel of Fortune. Like, you're not losing out on money. Like, it's going to be okay. This is good. This is fun.
Okay, my pride is at stake, and that is enough for me.
I'm a podcast host. We don't have pride. Sorry, Brittany.
Oh, Rose, you made several points with that one statement. All right, are y'all ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, We've talked about the Olympics, but what about the lesser known competitions that nonetheless require feats of endurance or strength, but aren't the whole kit and caboodle the Olympics are? To start, which of these activities is expected to launch a new competition backed by the Olympics as soon as next year? Is it A, esports, B, chess, or C, cheerleading?
Esports.
B, chess.
No, that's not true. It is cheerleading because they got their IOC approval, but they're not doing varsity control.
C, cheerleading.
Wait, did you choose cheerleading, or are you still with esports?
I chose esports, and I'm sitting with my incorrect answer. So I'm so nervous.
Don't be nervous, because the answer is A, esports.
Oh!
Unbelievable.
Keep your crown up, okay? Esports are both video games and virtual sports. Admittedly, I did not know what esports were. I thought they were esports.
Esports?
Like a Wii tennis?
Yeah, like virtual sports, like stationary bike riding. So all of you who bought a Peloton, watch out. It is reported that esports will very likely have their own official Olympics separate from the more traditional events, possibly as soon as next year. Have y'all been training?
No.
No.
Me either. I can't even play Mario Kart because I can't even steer the car. I'm always come last. But, all right, moving on to another alternative Olympics, which actually got in trouble for calling itself an Olympics. Which sport is not an event at the annual National Senior Games? I repeat, which sport is not included? Is it A, cornhole, B, power walking, or C, ultimate frisbee?
Power walking.
C, ultimate frisbee.
Well, I'm glad you said that because the answer, in fact, is C, ultimate frisbee.
Tie game, baby. Tie game.
Ultimate frisbee, they don't have it. There are, of course, lots of events that they do play. Triathlon, but also Tai Chi.
How do you compete in Tai Chi?
I don't know, but I'm open to finding out. Do you think you could win one of these events? Like, do you look forward to maybe competing in something in the future, maybe?
No.
They would wipe the floor with me probably now. Absolutely not.
The cumulative knowledge of how to play their particular game or how to compete in their specific event, that's something I will not trifle with.
Okay, to recap the score, Katie, you're at 1 point, and Rose, you're at 1 point. So without further ado, the final question. This year at the Twinks versus Dolls Olympics.
Sorry, what?
The Twinks versus Dolls Olympics, an annual pride event held in New York City that lovingly pits gay men against trans women. What was in the kiddie pool that participants wrestled in?
Oh, Lord.
Was it A, ketchup, B, baked beans, or C, unspecified goo?
C.
C. Absolutely C.
I said C first.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't matter because the answer is B, baked beans.
Ew.
What?
Ew.
Everything about this is a no from me.
The event also featured a cigarette smoking race and a spitting distance competition. Muna Mire, who covered the event for The Cut, writes, quote, Twinks versus Dolls is equal parts competition, pageantry, and filth. It's sort of like if Jackass were a day party, which sounds kind of fun to me. Do you think either of you could win one of these categories?
Oh, cigarette smoking race I could win for sure.
I was going to say, there was a point in time where I definitely could have probably.
Not now, yeah. I feel like back in my past self, but yes, past self could win a cigarette smoking contest.
I suppose that given the options, I would leverage my size in baked beans wrestling. And the entire thing would be disgusting to me, so I would be extra motivated to finish quickly.
That's good. That's good. I don't think you could pay me any amount of money to do that.
Come on. No amount of money? Really?
No, you're right. That's such a lie. That's a complete lie. I'm a freelance journalist. I will take any amount of money.
Like $5,000. I think you'd do it.
You're so right.
And you know what? It pays more than winning this game. But unfortunately today, we are ending in a tie.
Wow.
Yay.
Wow.
Well, Katie, Rose, thank you so much for joining me today. This is so much fun.
Thank you. This is great.
Thanks for having me. This is dope.
That was ESPN features writer Katie Barnes and Rose Eveleth, host of NPR's Tested. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I get back, why American trucks have become supersized, and what that reflects about today's cultural anxieties. Stick around.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from BetterHelp. It's easy to compare your life to everyone else's, but comparison is the thief of joy. Therapy can help you focus on what you need to live your best life instead of dreaming about someone else's. Give BetterHelp Online Therapy a try. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing at betterhelp.com/NPR. Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Quince. Even on a budget, quality is non-negotiable. That's why Quince is the place to score premium essentials at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Go to quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns. This message comes from NPR sponsor Vuori, a new perspective on performance apparel. Clothing designed with premium fabrics, built to move in, styled for life. For 20% off your first purchase, go to vuori.com/NPR.
My big question this week is, what can the growing market of supersized trucks tell us about our culture? Have you seen the big giants running our streets? I'm talking about trucks.
I came out of a restaurant. I was with my family, my kids, and I saw it was a lifted Ford F-250, and I just thought, wow, that's enormous.
This is Angie Schmitt, a city planner and author of the book Right of Way, which gets behind the wheel of big cars.
The truck was parked, so I had my 4-year-old son. I said, why don't you go stand in front of that truck? And I took a picture, and the image ended up going kind of viral on Twitter, and he just barely clears the front bumper, the license plate. Some of these trucks now are as tall as 55 inches at the hood, at the front end. So even for me as a standing adult, and I'm a medium to tall woman, they're coming up about to my chin in some cases.
Now, there are few things more American than a big old pickup truck, but in the past few years, popular truck models have gotten even bigger. And while some places do offer tax breaks on these heavier cars, at large, the trucks are taller, wider, and just bigger than ever before. I mean, what is the Cybertruck if not a video game tank? And while we all know that trucks have long been associated with power, we gotta ask, is bigger always better? My guest this week says that these changes in truck design can take a deadly turn. So what's fueling the desire for these hulking cars? And who pays the price? Stick around. Angie, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So the kinds of trucks we're talking about, these are big, 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 big trucks. How are these different from trucks that were on the market 20 or 30 years ago?
We've always had a handful of big trucks out there, but in the past, especially like in the 90s, there was really a lot of very small trucks. A lot of pickup trucks just had a bench seat and a single row of seats in the front, and they had a longer bed.
Right, just the 3 seats up front, maybe 2, yeah.
And if you see one of these 1990 Ford Ranger somewhere, it's really kind of shocking because in some cases they're about the size or even look smaller than some of the sedans we have right now. There's been a shift in the styling, and it's very popular now to have a very flat, menacing-looking front end with a large grille. So you see that sort of across the auto market, but especially it's become a little bit ridiculous in some full-size trucks. Almost all full-size trucks now have what they call a crew cab, or they have 4 doors. That led some auto writers to sort of compare them to minivans almost.
Interesting.
So they're more like family cars for some people, but with this intimidating kind of styling and shape.
I want to talk a little bit more about the size. These trucks, from what I've read, weigh on average over 1,000 pounds more than trucks of the past. And also, I read that they're about as long and almost as big as World War II tanks.
Yeah, that's correct. So some of these trucks now are 4,000 pounds or more, about 1,000 pounds heavier on average than they were at the turn of the century.
Wow. Okay. So They definitely are bigger, but what makes them so popular today?
There has always been truck drivers in the US, and I don't want to discount that some people do use them for work, right?
Yeah.
But most truck drivers, I believe it's about 3 and 4, do not need them and do not use the beds or the towing capacity in a typical year. And so for other people, it may be more of something that's sort of tied in with their identity, that's sort of a masculine vehicle type. I think very strongly it's promoted that way. I mean, if you watch a football game, for example, it's just going to be truck commercials, and they're going to show trucks, huge trucks, sort of out on these pristine cliffs, and you're exploring nature. And that's sort of the adventure that they're selling people. But the reality of how they're used, really, a lot of these are sort of sitting in parking lots at Target and Costco on Saturday, right?
This kind of focus on pushing a truck's size to its maximum capacity, or tricking out your car with things that are going to make it seem even more rugged or aggressive or sizable, that feels very connected to this term that you shared with us called petromasculinity. The term was coined by theorist Kara Daggett, and she basically links the push for fossil fuels, despite the warnings of climate change, to hypermasculine identity and growing political authoritarianism in the U.S.
Yeah, the best example, I think, in the auto industry, this phenomenon of rolling coal, where people are modifying their trucks so that they spew this really noxious black smoke out of them. And it's okay for people to want to be masculine and for that to be a big part of their identity. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But these styling features do have negative safety impacts, and they don't really have any functional purpose on the vehicle. One thing that's a little bit sad about that also is a lot of these subcultures and a lot of the influences on younger men. That's the demographic group that's most likely to be killed in a car crash, and is a group of folks that are really at very high risk in the United States to suffer a serious injury or be killed while driving.
There is so much gender stuff wrapped up in how I think we think about cars in general. Why are cars so tied up in sexuality?
That's a good question. I think so many things in our society are very gendered, and the way we think about things really is gendered to an extent that we sort of don't discuss openly a lot. You also see sort of things that are considered feminine being sort of ridiculed or mocked, like minivans have really gone out of style. Even at the height of sort of the minivan era, apparently the majority of drivers were men. But you see that style of vehicle really kind of mocked and belittled. It has to do with caregiving and those kind of values sort of not really selling anymore in the auto industry.
Wait. Most of the minivan drivers were men?
Yeah, there's a really good article about it by this guy, Keith Bradsher, back in the early 2000s. And he says, yes, the majority of minivan drivers were men. And that's the case in my family, too. We have a minivan, but it was my husband that picked it out and wanted it.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. Wow. All this talk about trucks, I feel like we can't get around the truck of the moment, the Cybertruck, which is popping up more and more on American roads. Even in New York, where I live, I have now officially seen 2 Cybertrucks this summer. I think that the Cybertruck is such an interesting example of this kind of massive truck, because on one hand, it seems like every masculinized design aspect of a pickup truck taken to the nth degree, like the boxiest, the widest. It looks like a transformer, like mid-flip. But on the other hand, it's an electronic vehicle. What do we make of the Cybertruck as a symbol of petromasculinity?
Yes, Kara Daggett talks about Elon Musk sort of representing a Western cowboy ideal that we see with the pickup trucks.
But I can't help but think it's also very militaristic.
Yes, there's some really good points made in this book that I've referenced by Keith Bradsher that was written a generation before my book. He has quotes from these auto executives in the 90s. And they talk about how they kind of understand, and they called it this reptilian impulse. So these kind of antisocial impulses among people, and they can sell cars for more by reflecting that. And one of the things they say is that U.S. consumers are very afraid. They're very afraid of crime, is what one thing this auto executive says. And he says it's not because of like a rational sort of reading of crime statistics. It's because they watch a lot of violent media. And they want to have the biggest vehicle because they're afraid when they go out on the streets, it's going to be like a battle zone. And they need to be the biggest and the fittest. And if someone tries to attack them, they need to be able to run them over. Literally, that's what they say in this book.
Oh my gosh.
This is just this one guy, but he was very instrumental at Chrysler. Some of the things they predicted in this book or he talked about have really come to fruition, like looking very militaristic. I think the Cybertruck is a good example of that. I think some versions of it are supposed to be quote unquote bulletproof.
Also, it has that function called the bioweapon defense mode, and it will protect you if there's a bioweapon for some reason detonated outside your car.
That sounds crazy.
I mean, it's not something really that comes up. I'm just saying in everyday life.
Yes, but you see like this level of sort of paranoia. And I think that there's some things definitely in our society right now, some disagreements, some political maybe instability, a lot of us versus them kind of thinking. But I will say that I keep referring to this previous era, the 90s, 2000s, and this book that was written. In that era, the vehicle that was like this, that everyone was sort of horrified by, was the Hummer.
Yes.
You know, that's a military vehicle.
Yeah.
It's so enormous. It's so ridiculous. Very bad for the environment, but, you know, was a moneymaker for GM and was picked up by a bunch of celebrities. And I still see Hummers out on the road today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Hummer based on the Humvee, like the military vehicle.
Right.
But these trucks that we're talking about today, these are not just like defensive vehicles. As you mentioned, sometimes they're used as offense. More specifically, a number of the cars that slammed into Black Lives Matter protesters were trucks. I mean, that was just one example of it being used pretty offensively. But these trucks are also pretty unintentionally dangerous, and you've done a lot of research into that.
Yeah. In 2020, I wrote a book and it was called Right of Way, and it was about what I call the pedestrian safety crisis in the U.S. So at that time, we'd seen about a 50% increase in pedestrian deaths over the previous decade.
Whoa, that's a big jump.
Yes. Now, just since the book was published in 2020, it's gotten much, much worse. They're up about 20% since then, now about 70% higher than we were a decade ago.
Wow.
And if they are struck by a large truck with a very flat front end, are more likely to be killed than they were in the past. And these folks disproportionately are folks who are lower income or people of color, or they may have a disability. And the people who are paying the price really are poorer, less powerful.
I've seen news reports about children specifically being vulnerable. I mean, you know, as we discussed, if you and I can barely be seen over the front end of a car that's this massive, then imagine it makes it much more difficult to see a child over the front end, and also probably very difficult to see a child behind a truck like that. I've read about children being backed over by, you know, their own caregivers or loved ones in their own driveways.
Yes, it is crazy how common that is in the United States. Just recently, NHTSA...
Oh, that's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Yeah, NHTSA required backup cameras. But as recently as a couple of years ago, as many as 50 children per week were backed over in their own driveways. This is according to a group called kidsandcars.org, most often by a family member or close friend. Backup cameras are going to help with that a lot, and they should have acted sooner to save more kids. But now that we've seen this big increase in hood height, we're seeing more of what's called front over collisions. So the same thing where it's kind of at close range, maybe you're in a driveway or parking lot, there's a child sitting in front of your car and they're completely invisible to you, the driver. So those kind of crashes and fatalities have really increased.
Taking in everything that we've discussed today, the safety issues, heteromasculinity, changes in massive truck size and what kinds of trucks you see on the market today, what does all of this reflect about American culture?
I think sort of the way we relate to people has kind of broken down, you know, real individualism and a lot of anger that's sort of close to the surface.
Well, gosh, you have given me some pretty serious stuff to think about, but at the very least, I am grateful that I learned some new terms to describe what many Americans are seeing on our roads every day. Angie, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you.
That was Angie Schmitt, author of Right of Way. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Barton Girdwood,
Alexis Williams,
Liam McBain,
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Jessica Placzek.
Engineering support came from
Becky Brown.
Our executive producer is
Veralyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Rosetta Stone, the perfect app to achieve your language learning goals no matter how busy your schedule gets. It's designed to maximize study time with immersive 10-minute lessons and audio practice for your commute. Plus, tailor your learning plan for specific objectives like travel. Get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off and unlimited access to 25 language courses. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR. This message comes from NPR sponsor Quince. Even on a budget, you still deserve nice things. Scoop up timeless high-quality goods for 50 to 80% less than similar brands with Quince. Go to quince.com/style for free shipping and 365-day returns.